They rehearsed the duel hundreds of times. Every movement was measured, every breath controlled, every step designed to look dangerous without ever crossing the line. But on that night, under the blinding stage lights of the Richard Rodgers Theater, something felt different the moment the shot was supposed to be fired. The audience wouldn't have noticed it at first. To them, it was just another breathtaking performance in a show known for precision. But backstage, the stage manager had already gone pale. A single prop handler froze in place, and one understudy whispered almost instinctively, "Something's wrong." Seconds earlier, two actors had stepped into the iconic duel, the moment that crowns the emotional arc of the show. Yet the tension in their eyes wasn't the usual dramatic intensity. It was sharper, unsettled, almost electric. A beat was missed. A cue landed half a second late, and then one of them lifted the prop pistol with a grip that didn't look like acting anymore. What happened next was so quick that even the most experienced crew members would later struggle to describe it. A stumble, a flash of fear, a sudden tightening of jaws, and a movement that shouldn't have happened. For a heartbeat, the duel stopped being choreography. It became real. Everyone who witnessed that moment knew it. They just didn't know why. And the truth behind that near tragedy was something the cast had tried to keep hidden for months. To understand why that duel nearly crossed the line, you have to understand the man who stood at its center. Ethan Reyes was not a typical Broadway performer. He carried a quiet intensity that drew directors toward him and pushed castmates to keep their distance. Known for his sharp discipline and an almost obsessive commitment to realism, Ethan had built a reputation as the kind of actor who never slipped out of character, even between scenes. It made him brilliant on stage, and unpredictable off it. Ethan joined the production during a period of mounting pressure. The original cast's shadow still lingered, and every new performer stepping into a major role felt the weight of comparison. But Ethan didn't seem bothered. If anything, he embraced the expectations with a determination that bordered on defiance. He studied every historical document he could find, memorized personal letters, even mimicked the posture of duelists from the late 18th century. For him, the role wasn't just acting, it was immersion. The man standing opposite him in the duel, Marcus Hale, was his contrast in almost every possible way. Marcus was warm, collaborative, and effortless in his charm. A performer who believed theater was meant to be a shared rhythm, not a battlefield of artistic intensity. The two had always maintained a polite equilibrium, a balance of personalities that worked well enough. But backstage whispers said something had shifted in the weeks leading up to the incident. A misinterpreted comment, a rehearsal argument, a moment in the wings where neither backed down. And so, on the night of the near accident, the audience saw two characters locked in a deadly confrontation. But those who knew the actors sensed something deeper beneath the performance. Ethan's jaw tightened a little too long. Marcus avoided eye contact longer than usual. A tension that wasn't in the script had found its way into the spotlight. The drama that erupted during the duel didn't begin on stage. It began with the men playing it. Long before Ethan Reyes ever stepped onto a Broadway stage, he learned to survive in a world where silence was the safest language. He grew up in a small apartment above a closed-down hardware shop on the outskirts of Newark, a place where the nights were long, the winters were unforgiving, and the walls carried arguments more often than laughter. His mother worked double shifts as a nurse, leaving before sunrise and returning long after midnight. His father, a man who once dreamed of becoming a musician, drifted in and out of the picture, disappearing for months and reappearing with promises no one believed anymore. Ethan spent most of his early years alone, filling the empty hours with a habit that would later define his entire career: observation. He watched people carefully, memorized their gestures, their moods, their inconsistencies. It wasn't acting then, it was survival. The more he understood, the safer he felt. His teachers often said he had an uncanny ability to mimic expressions with startling accuracy, as if he truly felt the emotions he was copying. But the truth was simpler. Ethan had learned early that becoming someone else, even for a moment, was sometimes easier than being himself. His first exposure to theater came unexpectedly. At 12, he wandered into a community center while escaping a particularly tense night at home. Inside, a local drama group was rehearsing a small play about colonial America. Ethan watched from the doorway, unnoticed at first, then invited in by a director who thought he was someone's younger brother. Something shifted that day. The stage was the first place where intensity wasn't punished. It was celebrated. Emotion wasn't dangerous, it was necessary. And the idea of becoming someone entirely different felt less like pretending and more like breathing freely for the first time. But it wasn't a smooth path. His father returned one winter, back with the same grand stories. He laughed when Ethan said he wanted to act, calling theater a hobby for people who can't face real life. The comment cut deeper than expected, carving itself into Ethan's drive. Every role he chased afterward became a quiet rebellion, a way to prove that disappearing into a character was not weakness, but mastery. Years later, when he moved to New York, he arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and a relentless hunger. He took classes he couldn't afford, slept on a friend's couch for months, and worked night shifts to cover tuition. But he also brought with him a childhood shaped by tension, silence, and the need to control every detail of his world. All of it would become the foundation of the intensity that defined him on stage. And all of it would play a part in what happened during the duel. When Ethan Reyes arrived in New York, the city did not welcome him with open arms. It confronted him, tested him, pushed him until he learned that ambition alone meant nothing unless he was willing to let it consume him. He auditioned for weeks without hearing a single callback. He was told he was too intense, then not expressive enough, then interesting but not yet ready. Every rejection stung, but each one pushed him deeper into the craft. He began to train with an almost monastic dedication, studying stage combat, vocal control, physical precision, and script analysis with a seriousness that set him apart even among the most driven students. He found his first real break in an off-Broadway historical piece where he played a Revolutionary War soldier. The production was small, the theater drafty, and the audience rarely exceeded 40 seats. But Ethan treated every performance as though the entire world were watching. His discipline caught the attention of a veteran fight choreographer named Adrian Lowe, a man known for blending realism with absolute safety. Adrian saw in Ethan a rare combination: focus, physical control, and a hunger to understand the emotional roots of conflict. He became a mentor figure, pushing Ethan to study the psychology of confrontation as deeply as the choreography. Through Adrian's guidance, Ethan learned that a duel on stage was not just movement. It was storytelling through threat, fear, and restraint. Every step had intention. Every pause carried a history. Every strike or feint revealed something about the character. Ethan absorbed these principles with an intensity that surprised even Adrian. It wasn't long before directors began to notice the sharpness of his performances, the way his presence elevated the stakes of every scene. Casting agents took note too, and he started landing roles in historical dramas, motion capture projects, and regional productions where emotional authenticity was valued over spectacle. His momentum grew steadily until he was cast in a national tour of a major musical. It wasn't Hamilton, not yet, but it brought him closer to the world he had dreamed of. Life on the road hardened him further. The constant movement, the nightly consistency required, the pressure of performing through exhaustion, all of it carved a sharper edge into his approach. He built a reputation for being the actor who stayed after rehearsals, who asked for extra notes from directors, who studied recordings of his own performances like an athlete watching footage of a game. But the same qualities that made him extraordinary also made him difficult for some to work with. His focus could feel isolating. His silence between scenes, a habit rooted in his childhood, often came across as coldness. He didn't mean to intimidate people, but his presence had weight, and not everyone knew how to carry it. Rumors started spreading. He takes things too seriously. He's too method. He pushes too hard. Ethan ignored it, reminding himself that he wasn't here to make friends. He was here to create truth. Everything changed when Adrian introduced him to a casting associate from the Hamilton production team. They were searching for someone with emotional range and physical discipline to step into a principal role for an upcoming rotation. Ethan auditioned with a ferocity that startled the room. His voice cracked at the perfect moment, his movements felt grounded in lived history, and his eyes carried a depth that suggested he wasn't merely playing a character. He was carrying the weight of something personal. He received the offer within a week. Joining Hamilton was nothing like the smaller productions he had known. The scale, the precision, the cultural impact, everything was magnified. Suddenly, every rehearsal felt like preparation for a legacy. Ethan threw himself into the process, studying original cast recordings, reading biographies, and dissecting the staging from every angle. He wanted to honor the role while grounding it in something real, something raw. But greatness often comes with friction. His intensity clashed with the existing cast's rhythm, particularly with Marcus Hale, who played the opposing role in the duel scene. Marcus, charismatic and effortless on stage, saw theater as an exchange of energy, a collaboration built on mutual trust. Ethan admired Marcus's talent but struggled with his looseness. To Ethan, collaboration was only possible after discipline. To Marcus, discipline only mattered if connection came first. The tension simmered. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small disagreements in rehearsal, differing interpretations of timing, questions about how much realism the duel should carry. Ethan wanted more weight behind the movements, more authenticity in the struggle. Marcus argued that too much realism blurred safety. Adrian, still serving as a consultant for the production, tried to mediate, reminding both men that choreography only worked when actors moved as one mind. Yet something had begun to fray. In the weeks leading up to the near accident, Ethan's dedication began to border on obsession. He practiced the duel alone late at night, replaying Marcus's movements in his mind, trying to anticipate every shift. He watched historical footage of reenactments, rehearsed footwork until the stage floor felt like an extension of his body, and pushed for adjustments to cues that had been fixed long before he joined the cast. Marcus, exhausted from the constant pressure, began to push back. Rehearsals grew taut, their timing slipped, their breathing fell out of sync, and the duel, once a controlled, symbolic moment, slowly became a collision of two creative worlds: Ethan's pursuit of perfection and Marcus's insistence on trust. Neither one realized how close they were to danger. Not until the night the choreography nearly shattered. The night of the incident began like any other performance, but those who were paying attention sensed a strange heaviness settling over the company. Marcus arrived later than usual, his expression tight, his movements marked by the kind of quiet exhaustion that rehearsal notes couldn't fix. Ethan, already in costume, paced near the stage left wings, repeating the duel choreography under his breath as if trying to control something fraying inside him. Their energy didn't clash, it simply refused to meet. Backstage, Adrian watched them both with a tightening discomfort. He had seen this dynamic before in smaller productions. Two actors approaching the same moment from opposite emotional worlds, their tensions slowly thickening into something neither could fully articulate. But this was Hamilton. This was a production where precision wasn't just artistic, it was necessary for safety. Adrian considered pulling them aside, but the cue lights flashed, the orchestra swelled, and the show moved forward before he could intervene. The duel scene approached, building through familiar beats, the rising tension, the charged lyrics, the choreography that every cast member could perform in their sleep. Yet as Marcus and Ethan moved closer to their positions, something subtle, dangerously subtle, shifted. Ethan's breathing was sharper, his shoulders tighter. Marcus's smile held a faint tremble. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The air between them had become its own silent argument. When they stepped into the clearing, the spotlight carved them out of the darkness, trapping them in a moment that demanded absolute unity. But unity was the one thing they no longer had. The first step forward was off by a fraction, so small that the audience would never notice, but large enough that Adrian felt a chill crawl down his spine. Marcus adjusted his stance, trying to pull the choreography back into sync, but Ethan didn't mirror him the way he usually did. His foot landed too firmly, his grip tightening around the prop pistol in a way that felt less like performance and more like instinct. Then the cue came. The moment Marcus was supposed to lift his arm in a deliberate theatrical arc. But his hesitation, just half a second, collided with Ethan's decision to step forward too soon. Their trajectories crossed at an angle no rehearsal had ever allowed. Marcus tried to recover, but Ethan, lost in the raw emotional charge of the scene, didn't see the shift quickly enough. The two actors collided shoulder first, a mistake that should never happen in a tightly choreographed duel. Marcus stumbled back, shock flickering across his face. Ethan's eyes widened, caught between the character he was inhabiting and the reality he had just breached. For a fraction of a second, neither man knew which world they were standing in. The orchestra continued, unaware. The audience leaned in, thinking it was part of the drama. Then Ethan raised the prop pistol again, but this time, the angle was wrong. Backstage, Adrian lurched forward, shouting a command usually reserved for dress rehearsals, not live performances. The stage manager slammed her headset as the crew rushed to positions they hoped they'd never need. Marcus froze, seeing the strain in Ethan's jaw, the tremor in his fingers. It wasn't aggression, it wasn't malice. It was something far more dangerous. Ethan had slipped too deeply into the moment, too far into the emotional script he had written for himself. Marcus reacted first. Instead of following the choreography, he broke it, stepping in, grabbing Ethan's wrist, and forcing the pistol down in a movement that no audience member could mistake as part of the show. Gasps rippled through the theater as the orchestra faltered, then collapsed entirely into silence. Ethan blinked, as though waking from a dream, his chest heaving, his expression caught between confusion and fear. Marcus held his gaze, steadying him without words. The spotlight flickered, the stage manager scrambled to call an improvised blackout, and the actors were pulled into the wings before the audience could process what they had witnessed. In the sudden darkness, the truth settled heavily across the company. The line between performance and reality had snapped, and it had snapped in front of thousands of people. But the deeper question remained, haunting everyone who had seen it. Why did Ethan lose control so completely? In the hours after the incident, rumors spread faster than the truth. Some whispered that Ethan had snapped under pressure. Others suggested a personal conflict with Marcus. But the real reason, the one the production team tried to keep quiet, was far more complex and far more human. For weeks leading up to the accident, Ethan had been fighting a silent battle he told almost no one about. The intensity he carried onto the stage wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a shield against something unraveling inside him. The perfectionism that had defined his career was beginning to turn against him. Missed cues in rehearsal felt like personal failures. Minor corrections landed like accusations. His mind, always sharp, had become a place of constant noise. Adrian had sensed it, the way Ethan pushed past exhaustion, the way his focus turned brittle. But Ethan insisted he was fine. What no one except Adrian knew was that Ethan had recently discovered a letter from his father, the one man he had spent years trying not to become. The letter arrived without warning, filled with apologies that reopened old wounds and promises that felt eerily familiar. Something in Ethan broke when he read it. Not loudly, not visibly, but quietly, in the places where even he couldn't fully reach. He tried to bury the feelings, channel them into the performance, believing that emotional truth would make the duel more powerful. But theater is not therapy, and intensity is not the same as healing. Under the weight of the letter, the expectations of the role and the pressure to match a legacy that towered over him, Ethan's grip on character and self began to blur. The duel, with its themes of anger, betrayal, and fatal resolve, became the one moment where those buried emotions had no room to hide. When Marcus hesitated, that tiny, imperceptible pause, it triggered something Ethan had been suppressing, the instinct to respond not as a performer, but as someone defending himself. He didn't mean to step forward too quickly. He didn't mean to tighten his grip on the prop pistol. The movement wasn't premeditated. It was instinct, shaped by years of unresolved fear and a childhood built on unpredictability. The loss of control wasn't an explosion, it was a fracture, a culmination of pressures that converged at the worst possible moment. Later, when Ethan finally explained himself in a closed-door meeting, he didn't talk about rage or rivalry. He talked about the letter, about the memories it dredged up, about the fear of failing, not as an actor, but as a person trying desperately not to repeat his father's mistakes. And as the room fell silent, it became clear that the near tragedy on stage hadn't been caused by conflict between two actors. It had been caused by the collapse of one man's internal world. A collapse hidden behind the bright lights of Broadway until the moment it could no longer stay contained. In the wake of the incident, Ethan stepped away from the production. It wasn't a dramatic exit or a scandal-driven departure. It was quieter, more deliberate. The kind of decision someone makes when they finally understand the cost of carrying too much alone. Hamilton's producers, aware of the pressures he had been under, supported the temporary leave. Marcus, who had once clashed with Ethan's intensity, visited him on the very first day. Their conversation was brief but honest, the kind of exchange that only happens after a moment where everything nearly shattered. For the first time, they weren't colleagues or rivals. They were simply two men trying to navigate the weight of their own histories. Ethan spent the months that followed in reflection. He began working with a performance therapist who specialized in helping actors manage the psychological demands of emotionally charged roles. He revisited the letter from his father, not to carry its burden, but to finally understand it. In that process, Ethan found something unexpected: the ability to separate his identity from his performances. The stage was no longer a place to resolve old wounds. It became a space to explore truth without losing himself inside it. When he eventually returned to performing, it wasn't through a massive Broadway comeback. Instead, he joined a smaller off-Broadway revival where the pace was slower, the stakes gentler, and the creative environment more collaborative. He rediscovered the joy of acting not through intensity, but through connection. The shared breath among performers, the trust built in rehearsal rooms, the quiet understanding that storytelling is a collective act. The Duel incident didn't end Ethan's career. In some ways, it clarified it. Directors began to value not just his discipline, but his evolving emotional depth. His performances grew more nuanced, less rigid, anchored not in the need to prove himself, but in the desire to understand his characters without letting them consume him. Adrian, ever the mentor, remained in his orbit, offering guidance that shaped Ethan's approach to craft with more balance and humanity. As for his legacy, it became something unexpected. People didn't remember him for the night things went wrong. They remembered him for how he returned afterward, steadier, more grounded, more open. His story quietly circulated in theater circles as a reminder that even the most disciplined performers carry invisible histories. It became an unspoken lesson for younger actors. Mastery is not just about precision, but about caring for the self that inhabits the character. Today, Ethan continues to perform, teach masterclasses, and mentor actors who struggle with the same pressures he once faced. His influence extends beyond any single role. It lives in the understanding that the craft of acting demands vulnerability, boundaries, and the courage to face the truths that surface when the lights go down. In the end, Ethan's legacy isn't defined by the duel that nearly became real, but by the humanity he found in its aftermath. In the quiet that followed everything, the meetings, the apologies, the whispered questions backstage, Ethan discovered something he had never allowed himself to feel fully: release. For years, he had built his craft on intensity, on precision, on carrying the weight of characters as if they were armor. But that armor had cracked during the duel, revealing the truth he had avoided. Greatness in performance does not come from rigidity. It comes from understanding, from balance, from the courage to face what life has carved into you without letting it dictate who you become. The stage, with all its brilliance and pressure, had always been the place where Ethan felt both safest and most exposed. Yet the incident taught him that vulnerability wasn't a flaw. It was the part of him that allowed his performances to breathe. Marcus, Adrian, and even members of the crew began to see a version of Ethan they had never encountered before. Not the tightly controlled actor driven by unseen battles, but the man who had learned to step back, acknowledge his limits, and choose presence over perfection. As audiences continued to fill theaters and new performers stepped into the roles he once carried, Ethan came to understand the deeper truth behind his journey. The craft of storytelling was never meant to be a solitary struggle. It was a shared heartbeat, a collective motion of trust, resilience, and the willingness to meet others halfway. The duel that nearly turned real became a turning point, not because of the danger, but because of what it revealed about the fragile line between performance and self. And perhaps that is the lesson his story leaves behind. Every artist, no matter how skilled, walks with shadows. But healing begins when we stop letting those shadows script our actions, when we learn to pause, to breathe, to let others in. So as one chapter closes and another begins, Ethan's journey invites us to look beyond the stage and into our own lives, to ask where we are fighting battles no one sees, and whether it's time to set the prop pistol down, step into the light, and start again.